So as it turns out, I was the lightning thief this whole time. Any excuse to wear these earrings, I swear, I'll take it. Cast your mind back to about 2018. I'm like about 16, I'm listening to new musicals, I'm enjoying them very much. And I'm very much within like the Be More Chill and the Heathers era. And I kept hearing about a musical called The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson musical. It kind of lived in that very similar niche of like teen musicals, and because of that, a lot of the people who were enjoying those ones enjoyed that one. So I tried to listen to it, I tried to give it a chance, and I couldn't really get through the cast album. It wasn't quite the right time, I wasn't in the right mood, and I promised myself, okay, I'll give it another shot another day, and then I didn't. It would take me about 5-6 years to actually give the Percy Jackson musical a proper chance, as, following in the footsteps of Heathers and Be More Chill before it, it has made its UK premiere at the Other Palace. And my thoughts on this show are a bit complicated. So, what did I think about the Percy Jackson musical? What did I like? What didn't sell itself to me? Let's find out. But, if you haven't seen my face before, hi, I'm Ellie, I talk about theatre. I am the most chaotic theatre person on the internet. I do reviews, I do discussions, I do versus brackets and rankings, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. But let's dive in to The Lightning Thief, the Percy Jackson musical, that I keep going to call Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, but that's not the title of the musical, that's the title of the book, and pretty sure the title of the film as well, but I don't know. On the whole, I'm not overly familiar with Percy Jackson. I didn't read the books, I didn't watch the film, I've heard that the film is not great, so I'm glad I didn't watch the film. My friend is a massive fan of Percy Jackson, and that was the first thing he said when I asked about other adaptations. He was like, don't watch the film's awful. The only version of the Percy Jackson story I even knew a little bit about was this musical. And I must say, I'm quite surprised of the tone of this adaptation, because from an outside perspective of what Percy Jackson is, I always saw it as a little bit older. As I said, it was kind of in the same bubble as Heathers and Be More Chill, and while Heathers is, you know, trying to aim a little bit higher than the age bracket it actually ends up appealing to, both of those musicals kind of found itself with a niche around 16 to 18-year-olds. It was like an older teen demographic. And so going into this musical, I kind of expected a similar thing. However, I feel like this musical actually skews a little bit younger. This adaptation, in a lot of ways, felt like a parody. It was very silly, it was very goofy, and it felt more in line with a much younger audience, maybe like a pre-teen to early teen audience. And that definitely took me by surprise. And because of that, it's hard for me to speak about this musical because I kind of don't fit either of its niches. I don't fit into the demographic of early teen. I may look young, I'm not that young. And I didn't grow up with Percy Jackson, so I don't have that inherent nostalgia for this piece that would give me an extra appreciation for how they do it on stage. So I find myself in a weird place with this musical, but when I'm watching something that clearly isn't for me, if I'm watching children's theatre, if I'm watching pre-teens theatre, I always try and put myself into the shoes of that audience, because that's who it's there for. With that in mind, I think the Percy Jackson musical is fine. I think it's okay. I wasn't enamoured by it. I think it's a fun little romp, essentially flawed but fun. I think the first problem is when it comes to adaptation. This is adapting a book, and you can very much tell that they are struggling to fit everything in within the runtime. Now, when it comes to adaptations like Percy Jackson, I really do enjoy going in blind, because I am someone who is really, really, really bad at watching things recommended to me. I am the worst. My friends will tell you, if I am recommended films, TV shows, and things constantly. I will never watch them. I will never find the time. I will never do it. And I often find the only way that I will get into these franchises, into these films, is by watching a musical adaptation. And there's so many that I have gone to see the musical version and come out really wanting to engage myself with the original versions of it. Lord of the Rings, a great example. Pretty Woman, Waitress, all of these musicals are ones that I went into them not knowing that source material and came out wanting to engage with it. Legally Blonde, another one. And I think that's the power of a great adaptation, that you can engage yourself with this piece, and even if you don't have an appreciation for that original source material, you can gain that afterwards. I feel like Percy Jackson didn't really do that for me. I didn't come out of Percy Jackson wanting to engage with the original book and with the original story, mainly because I think this is kind of weird in terms of adaptation. Now, Percy Jackson is quite expansive beyond this musical. This only adapts the first book, unlike something like Death Note or Your Lie in April that take literally tons and tons of manga and just shove them into one. And funnily enough, while those musicals worked more for me in terms of adaptation, this feels like it struggles more. And I think the reason that even though those ones are taking so much more source material and shoving it down into less time than this jumps around a lot. The story of Percy Jackson is that Percy Jackson is a half-blood, half human, half god. And he does not know who his dad is. He is sent away to this summer camp for half-bloods. They've all got massive parental issues. And when he finds out that he is the son of Poseidon, he is sent on this massive quest to find a stolen bolt of lightning. Essentially, in Act 2, this becomes a road trip musical. And those are really hard to do because you are essentially hopping from location to location to location. You are going from thing to thing to thing. And there's so much that this musical tries to do. There's so much this musical tries to pack in to this time that I feel like it will work better if you know the source material, if you have read the longer version of this, if you know the beats of the story, I feel like you're going to have a better time. Because me, going into this and not knowing that, I was kind of struggling to keep up at points. And I also feel like that hinders a lot of the impact that these different locations can have. It goes at too much of a breakneck speed. The pace is too fast. That often it feels kind of like whiplash, and I don't really have enough time to really put myself into Percy's shoes. I don't have enough time to really understand how he's feeling in these moments. I don't have enough time to really understand all of these different locations, all of these wild fantasy elements that this musical is throwing us into. It needed a lot more to dwell in these moments. It's such a huge shift going from Percy's normal life to finding out he's a god to going to the camp to going on the quest. And I feel like the musical just doesn't have the breathing room to properly portray this. As I said, there's a lot of moments where I really felt this. And I think it's a massive problem in Act 2. I think Act 1 kind of gets away with it a little bit more because it's just focused on the camp story. And while the first song is very heavy exposition, trying to shove an entire chapter or two into one song, it does kind of have enough time to introduce Grover, to introduce the camp, to show off the teacher and who they actually are. You get to meet the other people in the camp. You get to find out who their godly parents are. But Act 2 goes on this massive quest where we are hopping across America, where we are seeing fight upon fight upon fight. And these are not big enough. These are not expansive enough for me to really click with it. I think the only one that I really felt had enough time given to it was the fight with Medusa. But definitely in the latter half of Act 2, when, you know, Percy and the gang are fighting the main villains, going to be vague here to not spoil a 20-year-old book, there feels like there's not enough impact, there's not enough time dedicated to these to really give an impact. Honestly, a lot of these fights felt like they were over as they started. And I feel like that's also down to the space and the staging and the limits of what this has, but I'll speak about that a little bit later when I speak about the design of this show. Within this as well, I can't say that this was tonally what I expected out of a Percy Jackson musical, because from my limited knowledge of Percy Jackson, I always saw it as something a little bit darker, as I said before, a little bit older. I think a good comparison that my good friend Mickey Jo Theatre made was a comparison to Star Kid. And very much so, it does feel in line with that in its tone. Maybe not, because Star Kid does aim itself older with the language it uses. And a lot of the adult comedy it bakes in. This feels like child-friendly Star Kid. In terms of it feels like a parody. It feels very jokey. It feels very fun and goofy, light, and, slightly lower on budget. I think a lot of the material does show the younger demographic the books are going for. It feels very Descendants in a way. I know little about Descendants. The only thing I know about Descendants is that they constantly do songs like, I'm the daughter of Ariel. Look at my fins. We're Jasmine and Aladdin. Call us Jaladin. Like, it's very that. And that was the same kind of vibe I was getting from this. There were moments where I felt it worked. There were moments where I was like, okay. Honestly, I am kind of glad that it has a more fun and light tone, because it is very hard to take it seriously. But that may be me coming from a more cynical angle and coming in, as a bit older. Because it's especially in, the campfire song where they're like, I'm the daughter of Ares, and if you mess with me, you face the wrath of war, and he's a prick. I don't think it bothered me too much, but it was the campfire song where I feel like it became a bit too much for me. Because overall, while this is not the tone I expected for this musical, it does fit, but I think it does make it more suitable for a younger audience. Maybe even younger than the teen demographic that I thought it was going for. It's messy in places, it feels like it's a little bit too fast-paced, but I can see a lot of younger theatre fans really enjoying this, really getting into the storyline and the adventure of it all. So it's hard to dislike it, even if I couldn't really get into it as much as I wanted to. So overall, I look at it and I'm kind of a little bit mixed. Musically, this is where it matches something like Heathers and Be More Chill a little bit more. It's got quite a rocky, poppy score. I especially think that shows in the opening number, The Day I Got Expelled. I really enjoy the orchestrations of that song, even if it is a little bit heavy on exposition. And I like the way that it introduces Percy Jackson. I like how it introduces his character and the different things that are kind of surrounding him. I think it does it in a good way to kind of keep you on board and get you on board quite quickly. Another Terrible Day is a great depiction of the tone of this musical and the way that it adapts. Because it's silly, it's goofy, it's introducing you to different half-bloods at the camp. And it does it in exceedingly silly ways, and I like the cynical tone of this song as well, playing up for some great comedic moments. I will say a lot of the score for me kind of blended together. I think its strongest material actually comes in its finale number, Bring On the Monsters. That's a lot more of what I wanted out of this musical, because I think Bring On the Monsters kind of sums up this musical really, really well. It's fun. It's adventurous. It has a lot of optimism behind it. It's boppy, it's rocky. That's the kind of score I wanted throughout. Honestly, it is such a shame that you kind of have to wait to the end of the musical to get what I feel like is the greatest summation of what this is to me. There's other fun songs in there. Killer Quest is quite nice and ends Act 1. The kind of road trip melody, as I'll call it. You got Try, you got Lost, you got Drive. These are a lot of fun. And I think on the whole, musically, this does appeal quite well to the fan base that they're trying to go for. But I wouldn't say this is an overly strong score. It definitely has its moments, and I like a lot of the orchestrations, but musically, it hasn't really stuck with me amazingly well. What I'm going to speak in massive depths about is the design of this show, because there's some really fun things, and there's some baffling decisions here. First up, I really genuinely like the set design. This is a very small space when it is all said and done, but The way that this set is done is quite clever. The side panels of the stage going into the wings by the stairs have been covered with this metallic mesh-like material, giving this almost like factory feel to it. These are lit up in really nice ways with like blues and oranges and different colors that gives it a lot of life and also allows this to expand outwards a little bit more, making the space feel a lot bigger than it actually is. On stage, we have 2 staircases, which were the loudest set pieces I've ever seen. So these were kind of like, they flicked a switch and they could move it, and then they flick the switch back down and it compresses so it stays in place. But every time they flick that switch, it was the loudest hiss you've ever heard as the air like compresses. So they're in these like really serious moments, and then you just hear it's hilarious. But this allows the set to have a lot of flexibility. There's doors in these staircases. It allows them to create buses. It allows them to create the camp. It allows them different levels that they can have. And is overall an idea that is effectively used throughout the show to provide some more dynamic staging. I really like the panel above, the giant circle, behind which is a space where the actors can go behind. They use this quite well to create like an ethereal feel or a mythical feel. For example, this is where we see the Oracle. A lot of projection is used upon that giant circle at the top to give a sense of location, to give us the Camp Half-Blood sign. I love the aesthetic of this set. I love the visuals of this set. I feel like it created this world a lot more and made it feel a lot more expansive than this space actually is. Even if this is where they kind of struggle a little bit, because this is a small space and this is a very expansive story. There's a lot of really tough moments to recreate here, and this is not the only production that has struggled with this. The off-Broadway version also struggled with a lot of these moments because it has to use the very limited space to create giant monsters, to take you from different location to different location to different location, hopping across the country within a single song. And this is where I feel like it lacks a little bit of impact, because it doesn't have enough space on the other palace stage to really expand these moments and to give you the spectacle I think this show needs. I think there's good examples, and I think there's examples that were a little bit lackluster for me. A great example, the Minotaur. This was really simply created with the ensemble grabbing these boxes and using it to create the Minotaur's face. Complete with eyes, this chain box that had a nose ring attached to create like the nose, really smart, and these giant claws as well. It was a very creative way to bring this to life, and even though I wanted it to have a little bit more of a solid shape, a lot of the time with the movement that they were going for, they were like kind of making it disassemble and reassemble back together, which I think lacked the impact of this giant monster, this big hulking thing that should be taking up the entire space and should be looming over them at every moment. In general, this is really creative and really fun and a really nice way to do this. On the other hand, there's a lot of the fights, which I told you I'd get back to. You can kind of tell how little space they are playing with, especially in these fights. When you have, like, the 3 main characters fighting one villain, you can tell even with this limited amount of people, they do not have the space to play with. They try their best. They take it up the staircases. They go between levels. But these fights don't last long enough. These fights aren't big enough or huge enough to really give the impact that these scenes need. And a lot of the time, they felt over before they started, ultimately making some of these moments feel a little bit anticlimactic. There's also the substitute teacher in the opening number. She goes into this massive transformation and becomes a monster, which just ends up being a pair of wings on her back. I wish this was done a little bit more like the Minotaur, maybe a couple of ensemble members making her even huger than she actually is. Create the kind of hulking shape. I wanted a lot more of these monsters to be more ensemble-based, to be creative from different props. Even if they were like recycled or other objects doubling up as the creature's hands and arms and wings and whatever. Essentially, a lot of the costume monsters, I wanted a little bit more. And we're going to speak about the most baffling costume. There was one costume in this musical, because on the whole, a lot of them are in modern clothes. You know, they're kids. You've got the Percy Jackson hoodie with the lightning t-shirt. That was effective. I like Grover's design. I actually really enjoyed when he gets his half goat self, and you can see like the t-shirt he's wearing being a little bit more ripped and ragged and a bit dirty going into the fawn bottom. And I have to say, it is very funny. I don't know if there is an in-universe reason for the fact that he is a lot thicker when he is not wearing jeans. Because he literally, the actor, like, for the most part in Act 2, he's wearing normal jeans. And then for Act 1, he's mostly in, like, the goat bottom half. But it's like, the goat bottom half is like that. And then when he's jeans, well, I just want to know the goat secret. Because if I could make myself look slimmer by just putting on a pair of jeans, I would take it. But speaking about people being thick... There's Mr. Brunner, who is revealed in the musical to be a centaur. Now, I have looked at multiple productions of this, and this is something where a lot of the stage productions do struggle. Because obviously, it's quite hard to create a good-looking centaur on stage. This production opts to make it so that instead of having 4 legs, it's just the actor having 2. And it looks okay. The waistcoat looks quite nice on top and it goes into the horse legs. And then the teacher turns around. Why does the teacher have a BBL? Literally, he could poke an eye out with that thing. Mr. Brunner's been doing his squats, I swear, I'll tell you that right now. I think on the whole, you can tell a lot of creativity is being taken within this production. They're playing with a lot less budget, just like the off-Broadway production did. And within that, there's creative ways that they do it. There's fun illusions as well. Some of the illusions they do are really, really strong, and you can tell how proud they are of some of them. There's a really cool trick they do with a pen turning into a sword, which every time they do it is really, really cool. I really like the set design, and on the whole, I do like most of the costumes, even if there are some baffling decisions here. Why has the horse got such a massive butt? But Ryan Dawson, does a great job at bringing a lot of this fantasy elements to life. And even if I wanted a little bit more, even I wanted a little bit more spectacle, even if I wanted some more creative ways to get around some of the bigger and more ferocious monsters in this musical, I feel like for the most part it is effective. And finally, let's talk about this cast. This is a very well-cast production. Max Harwood as Percy Jackson is a really relatable protagonist. I feel like he packs in a lot of that angst. He packs in a lot of that anger and frustration of being left behind by his parent, of his relationship with his mother and his stepfather. Vocally, he's very impressive. And he leads this show with a real sincerity and a real authenticity that you can really get behind. Scott Folan as Grover is so sweet. He's like the perfect sidekick role. He's really charming and really easily lovable. There's such a heart to him, and you can tell immediately through everything he does and through his actions and the script how much he really does care about Percy. A lot of the reason for this is that, they bake it into some of the dialogue, is that, his species is meant to be very protective, and oftentimes he feels like he screws that up. I found myself really warming to Folan's performance as Grover, and I really like the dynamic that he had with the different characters within this musical, especially both Annabeth and Percy. Speaking of Annabeth, Jessica Lee plays Annabeth in this production. Fiery, feisty, and honestly, one of the coolest characters in this musical. But the best track in this entire musical, if I was going to be in this musical, there is only one track that I want to do, and that is the track that Paisley Billings has. Oh my god, every time that Paisley Billings walked onto that stage, I knew I was about to get a performance. If anyone understood the assignment of what this show is, it is Paisley Billings. She had such a wonderful variety of characters, going from Percy's mother, someone very authentic, someone very humble and down to earth and just wanting the best for her son. And then there's all of the camp characters that she got to play. She eats the scenery as Medusa. She is high camp, high art. I wanted more time with Medusa because of how funny Billings is in this role. And she matches that with all the other ensemble roles she plays. She gets a song as the ferryman, which is a massive highlight. If this show is camp and silly and fun, Paisley Billings understood that and matched that energy. A fantastic performance for this style of musical. And I really enjoyed Joaquin Pedro Valdez as Luke. There's a lot of twists and turns to this character that I won't speak about just because of spoilers, but Valdez gives a lot of weight and a lot of real emotion to all of the different sides of this character. A really varied and wonderful performance. On the whole, I think if you go into Percy Jackson understanding what this musical is, you're going to have a good time. I had a good time. It's a silly road trip musical that adapts the first book for the target demographic of that first book. I think this is going to be a lot more of a hit with that younger demographic than the slightly older demographic that stuff at Other Palace normally tends to cater for. And I think if you are a bit older, but have a lot of nostalgia for this story, for Percy Jackson, both the books, the TV show, the films, if you like those ones. I heard a lot of people didn't, but if you like those, I feel like you are going to be well served by this musical. It's imperfect in places because of some pacing issues, but a lot of these becoming a little bit stronger and a little bit easier to look over if you are more familiar with this story. I think there is fun to be had with The Lightning Thief. So, if you do enjoy Percy Jackson, I think it might be time to bring on the monsters. But what do you think? Have you seen the Percy Jackson musical? Have you seen this production? Have you seen a different production? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below. If you did enjoy this video, please consider hitting like and subscribe. It really helps me, it helps out the channel. Here's some links to some other videos on screen right now and a link to my Instagram if you'd like to drop me a follow over there. I also have other social links and a merch store in the description down below. But that's it for me today, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!